Hello again, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this Friday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show once again. First graphic here, kind of a cool graphic put together by the National Weather Service office in Juneau, and giving the 4th of July weekend outlook for several locations in the Panhandle. And Fridays is pretty much spot on temperature-wise. At 3 p.m., Juneau had 72 degrees, while Metlakatla, down at the other end of the southeast coast, had 59. And probably Saturday and Sunday values here will be on the mark, plus or minus a degree or two. Then also thrown in there, you can see 20-30% chance of showers. That can be taken several different ways. For example, 20 or 30% chance of showers could be another way of saying there'll be no rain. And then again, you could look at it as in conditions similar to the ones expected or occurring, we've had measurable rainfall 2 or 3 out of 10 times. And it could go on from there. So anyway, I wouldn't expect precipitation to be much of a factor through Sunday there for the southeast coast. And from there, going to fire danger, got high fire danger, zone of high to very high fire danger, the Copper River Basin, and then a much larger one up there over the upper Yukon Valley, extending from the Koyukuk Valley eastward across the Yukon Flats into the southern slopes of the Eastern Brooks Range, and an emerging area of extreme fire danger there along the Yukon River, either side there, and also on the north slope, a couple areas there, mostly on the central north slope, just edging into the high fire danger category. Otherwise, clouds, rain, cool temperatures over the western interior today kept fire danger minimal. And starting to come up over southern Alaska with the temperatures rising in the 70s, lower 80s, especially with the wind gusting 30 miles an hour along the North Gulf Coast, Valdez, and Seward. But right now, nothing into the very high fire danger category yet, but that could change. And for the hazardous weather graphics, there are no watches, warnings, or advisories anywhere around Alaska for the next 24 hours, including the Bering Sea, Aleutians, southern Alaska, and the Panhandle. So going into satellite imagery, you can see the cloudy skies there over the western interior. There was an area of precipitation, light precipitation, but some of it considered wetting rains in the last 12 hours, extending from Port Hiding and King Sam, where they picked up about 0.2 of an inch of precipitation today, extending up into the Kuskokwim Valley, 0.05 of an inch reported at McGrath, and Galena picking up 0.12 of an inch of precipitation. Then that extends back up toward the northwest coast. Kiana, only 1/100 of an inch. Kivalina, same thing, 1/100 of an inch. Kiana had 1/10 of an inch. And then lesser amounts to the west and lesser amounts to the east. And sunshine with downsloping northerly winds across south central Alaska, pushing the temperature up to 81 degrees at Seward with north winds gusting to 30 miles an hour. Valdez had 79 degrees with northeast winds gusting to 31 miles an hour. Otherwise, mostly sunny Copper River Basin, and you can see northern Koyukuk Valley, nice day for the Brooks Range over toward Arctic Village. And the southeast coast, dry, no precipitation reported today, but clouds over the southern part of the Panhandle kept temperatures cooler than the north, as I mentioned. Upper 50s, lower 60s, southern Panhandle, and then 60s, lower 70s on up to the north, and even pushing into the high 70s right on out to the North Gulf Coast, Cordova, and as I mentioned, Seward at 81. Cloudy, cooler conditions, Kodiak Island, and cloudy skies covering just about all of the Bering Sea, northward to St. Lawrence Island, but there were some breaks showing up over the Chukchi Sea. Otherwise, not a bad day. Also some clear skies reported in the observations along the Arctic coast. You can see some higher clouds over the Mackenzie River Delta, along with lower clouds there as well, and on the western Arctic coast. And rolling this through once again, you can see the mostly clear skies there's some building queue over the Alaska range. No thunderstorms recorded yet, but before the day's out, there may be a lightning strike or two occurring. But really, thunderstorms are not much of a factor here today. More the showers and cooler temperatures are associated with that trough that's actually dissipating, weakening, and will continue to do so as a higher pressure to the west slips eastward and begins to dry things out. Front farther out to the west brought breezy conditions, light rain, fog, and drizzle gradually eastward in toward Adak. But Bering Sea, low clouds, fog, light winds, especially eastern Bering Sea, and then a weak trough brought some moisture up to the Alaska Peninsula in the form of light rain and drizzle with lower flying conditions. And shower activity mostly toward the border or east of the southeast coast with partly sunny skies, partly and mostly sunny skies north, and then mostly cloudy south. And for tonight, not much change there for the Panhandle, variable clouds. North Gulf Coast, look for those winds to die off for Seward and all the areas and all the channel areas that were receiving winds today along the North Gulf Coast. Those will diminish tonight. Risk of thunderstorms, Talkeetna Mountains, maybe the central Alaska range, but nothing very widespread, and those will be diminishing after midnight, if not ending. And the rain will end out west, and look for skies to gradually clear throughout the night tonight, but clouds will definitely linger into tomorrow morning. And then across the Alaska Peninsula, trough sliding northward, actually a couple of troughs there ahead of that slow-moving and weakening front farther to the west will keep light rain, fog, and drizzle. Again, IFR widespread in those areas, as well as the Pribilofs in toward the southwest coast. And IFR in the forecast across all the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, on up to the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island area, and portions of the Arctic coast. While low pressure in the Gulf really not producing any weather at all, slips off to the southeast, and any moisture of that stays well off the southeast coast. Although by tomorrow afternoon, look for a chance of showers over the, especially over toward the border, St. Petersburg, and Wrangell on down toward Hyder and possibly Ketchikan. Mostly cloudy, chance of showers. Still partly sunny up around Juneau to Haines. Over to Yakutat, North Gulf Coast, not bad. Look for a few more clouds with temperatures still expected to rise up to maybe 80 in the Susitna Valley, Kenai Peninsula, but thunderstorms will be a little more prevalent and a little bit greater chance over the Chugach Mountains into the Kenai Peninsula. And that'll probably extend back up across to the central Alaska range as well over toward Eagle. Otherwise, not much going on. Mostly sunny, partly mostly sunny for 4th of July with temperatures not too bad, 70s to maybe lower 80s. And cooler along the coast with a chance of light rain, fog, and drizzle. And for the outlook on Sunday, that front continues to wash out, and just a weak trough makes landfall along the southwest coast by early morning Sunday with light rain, fog, and drizzle. And light westerly flow along with that will produce low clouds and fog, IFR flying conditions for the southwest coast up to the Bering Strait. And that's really the pattern for the entire Bering Sea and Aleutians. Low clouds, fog, little if any in the way of any clearing, and light winds, and IFR to possibly low IFR, and that's including the Alaska Peninsula into Bristol Bay. Look for light rain, fog, and drizzle for Kodiak Island. Chance of afternoon showers, and possibly a little bit cooler yet on Sunday for south central Alaska, but still some sun, not a bad day. Chance of thunderstorms, northeastern Copper River Basin, eastern Alaska Range, and partly mostly sunny up in the interior, temperatures into the lower 70s, otherwise 60s. And the southeast coast, a little bit better chance of rain over the central and southern areas, but light rain and mostly cloudy skies, and that'll result in a little bit cooler temperatures. Lows for tonight down that way in the 50s with lower, or in the 50s, mid to upper for portions of south central Alaska, and upper 40s, lower 50s over the remainder of the interior, mostly in the 40s over the Bering Sea, and 30s, above freezing 30s along the eastern Arctic coast. Highs tomorrow, again, approaching 80 again in the Susitna Valley, as well as the Kenai Peninsula. Widespread 70s, Bristol Bay, Copper River Basin, much of the interior, into the Noatak Valley, maybe even the Seward Peninsula, and then cooler 40s along the northwest coast, but 50s in the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, and C60 at Unalaska. And then that'll be followed by Sunday morning lows in the lower to mid 30s once again, likely staying above freezing for the Arctic coast. 40s Alaska Range, Brooks Range, and mid 50s over the southwest interior from King Salmon on up to St. Mary's. lower 50s for McGrath and Nikolai, as well as Fairbanks and North Pole to Northway, and mid 50s again, south central Alaska, with lows in the lower 50s for the Panhandle, and then highs Sunday afternoon, a little cooler, probably just mid 70s at best for the Susitna Valley, with a few more clouds and a little more widespread afternoon convection showers or isolated thunderstorms, mainly over the mountains, but still into the 70s from the Seward Peninsula eastward to the border there through the central interior, and upper 30s to upper 40s along the Arctic coast. Panhandle, not bad, in the 60s, maybe a 70 showing up, with mid 60s for Kodiak Island, and upper 40s to lower 50s in the Aleutians.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather graphics, Saturday morning, VFR in the interior. Areas of marginal VFR possible there along the Alaska Range on down in toward Iliamna Lake. Then you've got IFR, Bristol Bay, all of the Bering Sea, all of the Aleutians, mostly Alaska Peninsula, with IFR northward across St. Lawrence Island through the Bering Strait and all along the Arctic coast, especially central and eastern Beaufort Sea coast. IFR over the southern three quarters of the Panhandle with marginal VFR to the north. And for Saturday afternoon, good VFR in the interior, marginal VFR central eastern Beaufort Sea coast with some IFR around Kaktovik and Barter Island. No change out west, Bering Sea from the Strait southward to the Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula. IFR up to southwest Kodiak Island, VFR on to the north there, across Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound. Marginal VFR pushing westward to about Cape Yakataga, near Yakutat, in across, again, the southern three quarters of the Panhandle, with IFR in the central and south coast, along or just off the coast. And then for Sunday morning, we've got IFR in over the entire southeast coast and right along the North Gulf Coast. Spotty areas of marginal VFR seen there over south central Alaska, mostly east and south of the Alaska Range. Nothing too serious. Marginal VFR, Kamishak Bay, Kodiak Island becomes IFR, southwest Kodiak Island. Basically the same pattern, IFR, Alaska Peninsula, all the Aleutians, Bering Sea, and the central eastern Beaufort Sea coast, IFR, but VFR on the western coast there from Point Lacey to possibly Cape Lisburne. And then for Sunday afternoon, again, looking good on the western Arctic coast, but the central and east side, lower marginal to IFR conditions there. North slope VFR southward, all the way into northern Cook Inlet. Marginal VFR, though, creeping in and seeping northward, possibly into the southern Copper River Basin, maybe to the Talkeetnas, but basically Copper River Basin and all of the eastern interior will be VFR. And very little change out over the Bering Sea. Maybe throw some marginal VFR areas in or scattered around just to make the map interesting, but still IFR in the forecast right up to southwest Kodiak Island, as well now as the entire Gulf of Alaska, and that pushes up into western Prince William Sound. Panhandle, marginal VFR Sunday afternoon. Passes for tomorrow looking really good. All of passes, especially the Berks Range, Anatuvik and Adigan, VFR on either approach. And for Lake Clark and Merrill, some clouds early on, but of the VFR variety, and then definitely VFR for most of the remainder of the day into the evening. Rainy, same forecast, VFR. Western eastern entrance, windy VFR, north and south entrance as well. Good VFR day for Isabel and Mentasta, as well as Tanita, VFR, Portage, VFR, Chilkoot and White, marginal VFR becoming VFR. And for the freezing levels, really warm air aloft now out over the eastern Aleutians, 14,000 feet and then 12,000 feet in all over the southwest interior to Kodiak Island, 10,000 feet, cooling, a little cooler air aloft as you head northeast, but not that much colder, 8,000 feet, and that's about it. Definitely colder out over the western Bering Sea. And icing, really not much of a problem. Convection resulting in areas of mixed icing, freezing level to maybe 10,000 feet or so. There, south central Alaska, eastern interior areas, and to a lesser extent over the southeast coast. And then areas of rime icing, the potential for there in a band from, say, Nikolsky up across the Pribilofs to St. Matthew, St. Lawrence Island. That really becomes more scattered in nature as you head toward the southwest coast and along the Alaska Peninsula. Jet stream showing good ridging tomorrow right up from the Pacific there across the Alaska Peninsula all the way up into the Chukchi Sea with good southerly jet, 120 knots out over the west central Bering. And then northwest, 70 knots, good offshore flow there, keeping it warm and dry over the interior, especially south and east of the Alaska Range. 9,000 feet, strong winds, central Bering Sea up to 45 knots, much lighter over the interior, although some 50-knot northerlies there just east of the Arctic coast, across the Mackenzie River Delta. Same thing at 3,000 feet, 45-knot winds there, just clipping the extreme eastern Arctic coast. Otherwise, basically high pressure, light variable winds over the interior. Weak low off the southeast coast, and turbulence, light to isolating moderate chop, central eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island, maybe shimmying at 2.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, joined again by Eric Stevens from the GINA, or Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Thanks for joining us again, Eric.
Glad to be here.
Thanks. We are talking about satellites today, and what are satellites? And the easy way to talk about that would be to introduce our friend the globe here, which is a round spheroid type shape. We haven't been on a flat Earth as far as history is known for several hundred years now, and because of that we also know that we are orbiting around other objects in space, and that objects are orbiting around the Earth as well. We call all those things satellites in some form or fashion, right, Eric?
Right. Well, this leads to the discussion of Johannes Kepler's research 400 years ago. Did some of the early work and founded the 3 laws of planetary motion, which are important to planets and also to weather satellites.
Okay.
Kepler's first law talks about how the orbit of an object around another object is an ellipse, not necessarily a circle.
Kind of a flattened circle?
Yeah, depending on how flat
squished
it could be.
Okay.
For our purposes, we'll just say they're mostly circular.
Okay.
The second law is most important for us, though, and that is the closer an object is to the thing it's orbiting, the faster it goes. So in the solar system, the planet Mercury is the closest planet to the sun. It orbits the sun in 88 days. It moves at 100,000 kilometers an hour.
It is just
moving.
Okay.
Right. And further out from the Earth is Jupiter, and it moves at only 1/4 the speed of Mercury, and it has to go further, so it takes 12 of our years for Jupiter to make 1 lap. The further out you are, the slower you go.
Okay.
So we're talking about planets. What does it have to do with weather satellites? Turns out Kepler's laws apply to planets orbiting the sun. They also apply to satellites orbiting the Earth.
Okay.
You know, our natural satellite is the moon. There's the famous Apollo 8 Earthrise shot.
Beautiful shot.
Oh, yeah, you could just talk about that forever. December 1968, the moon is about 250,000 miles away from the Earth.
Okay.
Takes a month to go around the Earth. It's that far out, it takes a full month to do an orbit. Another shot here of the International Space Station. Instead of being 250,000 miles out, the ISS is only 250 miles out. It's really close. And so it doesn't take a full month for the space station to go around the Earth. It only takes 90 minutes. It's so close, it just whips right around 90 minutes.
Okay.
So weather satellites, there are a number of weather satellites, and there are a number of orbits. The further out you have the satellite, the longer it takes to go around the Earth. And this is important because different satellites have different purposes. So we have a satellite here. This little salt shaker lid will serve as our satellite going around the Earth. Let's say you have a satellite that's 22,000 miles above the Earth. This is kind of a magical spot because at that distance, it takes a full day for the satellite to go around the Earth. Imagine if you put your satellite 22,000 miles up from the equator and had it go with the Earth as the Earth spun.
The same speed.
Right. The satellite goes around the Earth just as fast as the Earth itself is turning. In effect, the satellite will hover in one spot,
I see.
and it appears when you make a movie loop of picture after picture after picture. You can replay that, and you get these movie loops. Geostationary satellites, these are called, because they're stationary in appearance, and they provide a constant frame of reference. We've got an example here. Another nice thing about these satellites, since they're that far out at 22,000 miles, you can see from pole to pole, which is nice. So they're pretty broad view and a constant frame of reference.
So those are the pictures. If you're watching a weather satellite loop on TV, your favorite weather show, that's the picture that you're going to see is one that's sitting over the same spot.
If you're seeing a movie loop play again and again, that came from geostationary satellites. That's the only way you can do that.
Yeah.
The bummer, though, for us in Alaska is we're up on the very top of the planet. And for geostationary satellites to work, they have to be over the equator. So for the geostationary bird to view Alaska, it's kind of like reading a book, but you're reading it edge on like that.
Right.
So there's another kind of orbit called the polar orbit,
Okay.
which is nice. We're near the pole.
Yeah.
And here's a satellite. Those polar orbiters are much closer to the Earth, getting down toward International Space Station elevation. And they're not in the equatorial plane. Rather, their orbital plane is inclined like this. And the Earth turns under that satellite as the satellite orbits. The nice thing about that is for Alaska, the satellite will go right over Alaska a few times a day. And so you get a much closer image. We've got a shot from the Sumi NPP satellite. Specifically, it's a true color image from the VIRS sensor. That's an acronym there.
Okay.
But it's a beautiful shot of Alaska, and you can see so much detail. The kind of detail, because you're close in,
Very high resolution.
you couldn't get this kind of view from geostationary satellites. The advantage of these polar orbiters is nice close imagery. You can see a lot of detail. The disadvantage, though, is that the satellite flies by,
Right.
and then you have to wait a while to get the next image. And if geostationary weaknesses are that you're reading the page like that, the polar orbiter, you're reading the page straight on, but it's so close, and then it zips by, and you have to wait for the satellite to come around the Earth again. So there's no one perfect solution. Different satellites for different orbits. Each has their strength, and amazingly, it all comes back to Johannes Kepler and his laws of planetary motion. The same laws that govern how the planets orbit the sun, they govern how the satellites orbit the Earth, and even our little pretend salt shaker right here.
Right, okay. Well, since the 1957 Sputnik, we've been putting man-made objects into orbit around the Earth and starting to get pictures back. Who knows what will happen in the next 50 to 100 years. Amazing
it's
stuff.
a growing science, and the future is bright.
Thank you so much for joining us again, Eric. And for more information on Dehne and what the satellite systems do there and what Eric's been talking about today, you can go to the web address on your screen. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Today's sea ice analysis updated the 3rd of July 2020, showing again sea ice-free waters really not any farther to the north, at least not too much farther to the north, but up there west of or east of Wrangel Island. Otherwise, not much change occurring along the central eastern Beaufort Sea coast, and really no big changes expected for the next 5 days. Moving on to coastal water forecasts there. For the south coast of the Panhandle, southerly winds tomorrow at 15 to 20 knots, 5-foot seas. Southeast winds 15 knots on the north coast with 5-foot seas. And southeast 10 in the forecast for Clarence Strait. And light southerly breezes for the central and northern inside waters at about 10 knots with seas on average at about 2 feet. Outlook for Sunday. South winds 5 to 10 knots for all the inside waters from Dixon Entrance on up through Lynn Canal and Glacier Bay. South coast looking at light southeast breeze at 10 knots with 5-foot seas, and then west-northwest breezes on the north coast with seas running at 4 feet. Cook Inlet tomorrow, east winds 10 knots, 2 to 3-foot seas. Kamishak Bay, westerlies at 20 knots. Small craft advisories for the Barren Islands. West winds 25 knots, seas 5 feet. Swing the direction around to easterly for the North Gulf Coast, 10 to 15 knots, strongest over toward Middleton Island with seas at 4 feet. Prince William Sound, variable to east winds tomorrow at 10 knots with 2-foot seas. Outlook for Sunday, Cook Inlet, southwest winds 15 to 20 knots, strongest south of the Forelands with seas at 5 feet. South 20 knots for Kamishak Bay, the Barren Islands, southeast winds 15 knots. East winds at 10 knots for the western North Gulf Coast and Prince William Sound, and eastern North Gulf Coast looking at southeast winds at 10 knots with 4-foot seas. Bristol Bay on Saturday, light southeast winds at 10 knots with 3-foot seas. The Alaska Peninsula, southerly winds at 20 knots. And Shelikof Strait, southwest winds at 15 knots. East side of Kodiak Island, westerlies at 20 knots with 5-foot seas. And for Sunday, for the Alaska Peninsula, west-southwest wind, 20 knots, and southwest winds actually extend from Cape Sarachev all the way up to Sitkinak Island and up the east side of Kodiak Island and Fognak Island as well, possibly. Otherwise, Shelikof Strait, southwest at 15, and Bristol Bay, southwest 15. For the Fox Islands, we've got southerly winds coming in toward Nikolsky at 25 knots. Otherwise, not much different for Unalaska Island, south 20 to 25 knots. Small craft advisories for the Adak-Atka zone. Southwest winds 25 knots, seas as high as 8 feet, and then westerlies at 20 from Amchitka to Shemya. And then for Sunday, small craft advisory, south winds 25 knots from Shemya to Kiska, seas 10 feet, Kiska toward Adak, southwest 25 knots. Lighter winds for the Adak-Atka zone, 15 to 20 knots from the southwest, and westerlies at 15 for Unmak Island and 20 knots out of the west for Unalaska Island. For the southwest coast, south of Nunivak Island, southeast winds 15 knots, Yukon Delta coast, southeast 20 knots, and for St. Lawrence Island, small craft advisories, east winds at 25 knots, southeast 25 for small craft advisory, St. Matthew Island. The Pribilofs looking at southerly winds at 20 knots with 6-foot seas. And for Sunday, not bad wind-wise anywhere, southwest at 10 along the southwest coast, St. Lawrence Island, south at 15, 20 knots though for St. Matthew Island, otherwise 15 out of the southwest for the Pribilofs. And we've got northwest winds at 25 knots for the extreme eastern Arctic coast there with 4-foot seas. Otherwise, light out of the north on the east side, central and west side, east at 15, and then 10-knot winds from Cape Beaufort to Wales. And then on Sunday, east 10 knots, Wales to Cape Thompson to Cape Beaufort, northeast at 10. 15-knot winds for the western Arctic coast out of the northeast, easterlies at 15 on the central coast, and east to north, especially on the east side there, more northerly but light, 10 knots, seas as high as possibly 2 feet in the ice-free areas. And for tonight, low clouds and fog, really widespread along the Arctic coast, especially on the east side there, through the Chukchi Sea, Bering Strait, all of the Bering Sea, and then throw some rain in along in advance of that front, and light drizzle and rain with those two troughs, one along the Alaska Peninsula, and the other one just grazing the southwest coast. Otherwise, diminishing clouds over the western interior, and fair for the Panhandle. Tomorrow, a day much like today, maybe a few more clouds, a little more widespread shower or thunderstorm activity over the Talkeetna Mountains and Alaska Range, as well as the Copper River Basin areas. But temperatures still back into the 70s, all of interior Alaska, cooler along the coastal areas. Weakening front washes out into a trough on Sunday as it hits the southwest coast with some light rain, fog, and drizzle, as well as Kodiak Island. Otherwise, mostly fair over the interior, temperatures back into the 70s. Thank you for joining us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.